To buy a new supercharger for a C6 Corvette, you usually spend between $7,000 and $10,000. Well, I'm going to explain how I did it for just over $6,000 and how you can do it for $5,000 or less with my Facebook Marketplace supercharger. So I wanted to build a reliable street car and not absolutely break a budget, but I knew I wasn't going to try to make 800 horsepower either. So I jumped on Facebook, started looking at Pro Chargers, and I found a used one not too far away from me for $3,000 with injectors. Buying a used supercharger is a complete no-brainer, and I highly suggest you go the same route I did. The one thing I would recommend, make sure all your hardware is there, all your piping is there, and make sure that there's nothing mechanically wrong with the supercharger itself. So I did pay $3,000 for my kit, and it did come with injectors. It also came with a belt, so I didn't have to buy any input cost towards that. If the kits that you're looking at don't have injectors with them for sale, you can buy fixed 650cc injectors off their website for $680. A standard belt for the right size from Napa was $50, or if you do buy used injectors, I did have mine cleaned for $192 if you are fortunate enough to get injectors with your used Pro Charger. A couple cheap mods, I would say, they are much more on the cheaper side, that I would do while you're in your engine bay is picking up a 160-degree thermostat. It was $80. Colder spark plugs for your supercharger, that was $70. And a map sensor to read the higher air levels that are going into your intake that obviously a naturally aspirated motor is not used to. After you've bought your plugs, your thermostat, and your map sensor, you have spent about another $200. As you can see here, I do have aftermarket fuel rails, and I also have an ethanol sensor. No, you do not have to do that, especially if you're just going for the 500 horsepower range, but I did it because it was only $500, and I found a whole aftermarket fuel system for this thing that I purchased and put on this car. I think the best route for most of you guys that are wanting a nice weekend build that's not making 700 horsepower is to just purchase a Kenny Bell Boost-A-Pump. They're anywhere between $300 and $500, and they will work absolutely great for most applications on 6 to 7, maybe even up to 8 pounds of boost. All right, so it's pretty common. After you've got all this, you're going to need a tune. Street tunes around me are quite often $500. I would say dyno tunes are roughly $750. I'm just guessing on most boosted applications. I'm pretty sure mine was $700. But just for the sake of this argument, we'll say that you're going to street tune it for $500 just to save even more money, especially if you're staying on 93 octane and things of that nature, as you should with a setup like this. So you just paid $500 for your tune, $3,000 with your Pro Charger. Let's just say you got injectors with it and they were cleaned for $192. You bought a 160-degree thermostat to try to keep temperatures under control with that massive intercooler in the front. You put a range colder spark plugs in it, and you put a map sensor in it, adding up to another $200. And the last thing, if you didn't buy injectors, was you had to buy a Kenny Bell Boost-A-Pump for $400. If you were fortunate enough like me to buy a Pro Charger that had injectors with it, you would have spent $4,418 to do this whole build. That's the tune, that's the thermostat, that's the whole 9 yards. That's all good extra mods, not cutting corners, to make this car much more reliable. All right, so even worst case scenario, let's say you had to buy new injectors. It adds $700 to the price, but then you subtract $200 for the fact you wouldn't have to have injector cleaning. That puts your new total at $4,956. That's based off $680 for FIC injectors or ID, Injector Dynamics. That is the only two brands I would run on a C6 Corvette. They're easy to tune, they're reputable brands, and if you have problems, they will get it worked out. They're both great companies. So basically, congratulations, you just supercharged a Corvette for $4,956, which is insane. I will say, because I know there's going to be people in the comments, I did not spend that. I spent $6,293 on mine due to the fact that it has an E85 sensor and dual fuel pumps, and it also got dyno tuned instead of street tuned, so it did add to the cost some, but $6,200 in my car makes 600 wheel horsepower was a no-brainer. All right, now that we've ran the numbers, let me show you the before and after on my quarter mile times.